Hello, good morning. Welcome everyone to Contexte Live, our first ever for EU edition on energy. I'm delighted to welcome you today. My name is Quentin Harris. I am Contexte Deputy Editor-in-Chief in Brussels. We will be with you for the next 45 minutes to discuss Russian fuels, the what, the why, and how the EU's plan to phase out import of gas, oil, and nuclear matters from Moscow. So the topic was voted more or less an hour ago in the European Parliament's Energy Committee and is going to be discussed by energy ministers next week. But there is still a long way to go before it becomes a law, and with very likely a lot of plot twists along the way. So as ever, we will give you deep information, insight, and the inside track of what's going on into the Brussels corridors of power. But this live is also for you, dear viewers. Your questions are more than welcome. Please type them in the chat, and our reporters will be very happy to answer them. So here with me, we have two of our reporters from our energy team. So first of all, hey, Jack.
Hi Quentin. Hi to everyone watching.
And you are managing editor for energy, and the other is Kieran Sutherland.
Hi Quentin. Hi Jack, and hello to everyone watching.
And you are also an energy reporter here. So first of all, let me start with you, Kieran. So what is your main message for you today?
So I'm going to tell you about the realities of what the EU is agreed to do. What does it actually look like to ban Russian gas? After all, this is a union of 27 member states that bought more Russian fossil fuels last year than supplied to Ukraine in military aid.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. And Jack, what are you going to talk about?
Well, I just want to take a bit of a step back and say, it's quite a remarkable thing the EU is doing right now. It's quite rare for Brussels to try and intervene in what are often seen as national energy decisions about the energy mix. And here we have a permanent and binding prohibition on buying pretty much any kind of fuel source from Russia forever that could take effect within 10 weeks.
Okay. Well, thank you to both of you. So right now, let's go down to business. Let's maybe start to discuss about REPowerEU. So this June, the European Commission proposed a regulation for a three-step phase-out of imports of Russian fuel. Maybe, Kieran, can you explain a bit to us and to our audience, what was the motivation of this regulation?
Yeah, so this is the EU trying to strengthen its energy security. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, they launched the aptly named REPowerEU program. This is all about diversifying energy supplies, reducing gas consumption, and eventually, as we see now, cutting off Russian gas imports and other fossil fuels.
Okay, and maybe this is for you, Jack. Why there are three phases?
Well, this is like a big reminder of how complicated gas markets are and how complicated gas contracts can be. Von der Leyen has made very clear she wants to end the era of Russian fuels once and for all. That's what she said in a keynote speech to the Parliament when she was seeking a second mandate last year. But it's quite complicated to do that. These contracts are drawn far in advance. Some will already have been signed for potentially years, if not decades, even before the Commission came out with this regulation. So you need to do this gently first. Potentially as early as next January, they're getting rid of forbidding people from signing any new contracts, and then gradually for contracts that were already signed will be phased out over a period running up to the 1st of January 2028.
Okay, and maybe a question for both of you, but how dependent is the EU on Russian fossil fuels, so we can get some kind of a big picture on the numbers?
Sure thing. So it was almost comical in 2021 as Russian soldiers were massing on Ukraine's borders. Germany was importing 55% of its gas from Russia. It was by far the biggest importer. But for the wider EU, in 2021, over 40% of Russian pipeline gas was coming from Russia. And now, did you ask about what it is now?
No.
So they've now diversified, and in last year, in 2024, it's down to 11%.
Okay.
So they're in a good position, or better.
Okay, so maybe if we about this reliance of Russian gas, which still exists today, can we already trying to pinpoint the impact it's going to have on individual member states?
There's definitely some who are more affected by this than others, and maybe for geopolitical reasons, and maybe just because of their actual physical geography. But certainly Hungary and Slovakia have been pretty reluctant to wean themselves off Russian supplies. They're still buying a lot of Russian gas, particularly via pipelines, and politically seem unwilling to change that. But there's actually quite a lot of other countries, also in the west of Europe, that actually get a lot of liquefied natural gas, which is first liquefied and then shipped, which is delivered to France, to the Belgian port of Zeebrugge, to Spain, and those are actually even now quite big importers of Russian gas.
Okay, so still have some member states like still from one way or the other like still import Russian fossil fuels. Like what was the reaction so far in the Council?
Yeah,
maybe for you, Karen.
So we did quite a lot of extensive reporting on this. We've followed the Council revisions the whole way through the process, and generally there's been broad political support. Just a few member states have raised a lot of technical questions about reporting requirements, and of course, as Jack already mentioned, Slovakia and Hungary have flat out opposed this measure.
Okay, and maybe like this is also like another layer of difficulty. Just like REPowerEU is also based like more or less as a trade policy, so it's based on the QMV. So can maybe someone explain like how negotiations are going to work in the Council as it is under like a dedicated form of voting?
Yep. So I mentioned before, and like Jack said, the Hungary and Slovakia are opposed to this, but the Commission has put this forward for a very basic reason, that they can't veto it like they've done previously on other sanctions.
Okay.
QMV basis is qualified majority voting, where you need 15 member states to pass this legislation.
Okay.
And that's pretty much like more or less explicitly, why they've done it this way. As a piece of trade legislation, some people see it as less legally robust than sanctions would be. Sanctions are if you want to ban something, a pretty well-tested way of doing that. But they may think it's likelier to pass, knowing that at least one, possibly a small handful of member states might oppose a sanctions ban. They've found this other way of doing it that can escape those national vetoes.
Okay, we are going back to the sanctions later, but maybe I would like to continue to work a bit on REPowerEU. So, Kieran, so what happened this morning in the European Parliament?
So yeah, this morning in the European Parliament, they adopted their negotiating position for the upcoming trialogues. Well, nearly. They still need to. There's some technicalities next week, but it was a joint committee vote between the Energy and Trade Committee, and it passed the mandate to negotiate, and the actual position passed with a huge majority. And Parliament has shown a bit more ambition than the original Commission proposal, but we might get into that later.
Okay, and what kind of ambitions? Like it means they want to have this ban to arrive sooner, or just to cover even more products and energy?
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Their timeline is a year quicker than what proposed by the Commission, so they want to ban all Russian gas by 1st of January 2027, which is a year ahead of what the Commission proposed. They also want to do oil. The Commission refrained from that because they argued it was already sanctioned, and there's some other provisions to look at petrochemical products, and there's a nice little thing about a fine for breaches of this, which is 5% of annual global turnover.
That's quite a lot of money for an oil and gas company to have to risk, right? I mean, they really wanted to make them sweat about that.
Yeah. Well, maybe, this is a question for both of you, but what was the industry reaction, like either to REPowerEU or to what the European Parliament is proposing? Because like if basically like companies or member states do not respect, this ban of Russian gas, it can become very costly for them.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing. I mean, clearly, fossil fuel companies, I suspect, are a little bit nervous about any plan that is kind of prohibiting fossil fuels. But there are, at least in public, they have focused on some of the more technical aspects of this proposal. Lobby groups such as Eurogas have spoken out about how does it work when you arrive at the border of the EU with a consignment of gas? How do you prove where it's from? When it's come from a pipeline, that's pretty easy. When it's come in the form on a ship or as liquefied gas, that's a little bit more complicated. And how do you prove that this gas is or is not from Russia? How do you assure the customs authorities that it's permitted without a whole bunch of sanctions and fines and paperwork and confusion?
Okay, we just have a question on the chat, which I think is along those lines, which I think is super interesting. Is like maybe for both of you, just like, do you have from Iman? So do you have a sense of what percentage of long-term gas supply contracts are really vulnerable to legal threats? Like, and for example, like Iman mentions like a take-or-pay clauses. Do we have any numbers on this? Do we have any like anything we can add?
Well, it's a very interesting question about the legal aspects, because clearly, some contracts have already been signed, and this regulation would require often European companies to break those contracts. And when you do that, there's a risk of legal challenge. Now, the idea behind this regulation is that normally there's a clause in those contracts that allows the contract to be broken if there's what's known as a force majeure, so an unforeseeable, unprecedented, unpreventable event, such as a natural disaster. But that whether those are really applicable and grounds for breaking a contract in this case, it's going to lead to some legal action. Our sense is that those kind of clauses are pretty standard in a lot of gas contracts. I don't have the figure on me. Maybe Eamon himself does. But in any case, you're going to keep a lot of lawyers very happily paid for quite some time, arguing over whether this falls within the scope of what they allow.
Okay, so
just to come in on the legal aspect as well, there's this whole emergency brake provision that the Commission has put in. It's called Article 15. And a lot of negotiators, both in the Council and in the Parliament, are concerned about how this could affect arbitration proceedings, because it impacts the unforeseen circumstances, nature of whatever arbitration that could take place. A lot of Parliament negotiators do expect Gazprom to start filing lawsuits over this.
Well, pretty sure I'm pretty sure it's every time there is a ban, it's always a very good chat and business model for lawyers. So,
and if you look at what kind of European oil and gas companies are saying right now, they're saying exactly this. There are no EU sanctions, so we are allowed to carry on fulfilling this contract, and indeed we are obliged to carry on fulfilling this contract that we've signed because it carries on running. And if we don't take the gas, we still have to pay the Russian supplier anyway. So that's hardly a better situation to be in.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe for readers who are still interested to explore a bit more this topic, so Kieran, you wrote with our colleague Anna, like how this ban would actually work. But also from last week, you published a fantastic infographics on where EU member states stand on the Russian gas ban. So feel free to take a look on the website. Okay. Part of the live, so things happen. Okay, so if we go maybe to the second one, part of the chat is really about the sanctions, the tariff, and the role of the US. So normally in EU decision making, the Commission proposes something. Very usually Parliament and Council like review, amend, fight after there is a trilogue. The Commission after is here when there is an agreement to implement it. Right now it seems slightly different because we have another track of sanctions or ban which are coming on sanctions and tariff for the Russian ban. So maybe Jack, can you explain to us like what is the nature of these extra sanctions that were proposed by the Commission?
Indeed. In mid-September, just a few months after it proposed this regulation, it actually proposed extra sanctions on the same topic that would effectively ban Russian liquefied natural gas. And this is a sanctions proposal, so it requires unanimity among member states, but it's also much more ambitious than the Commission's own proposal from June. The ban would take effect much sooner. So, it's very weird to have these two kind of parallel proposals being discussed at the same time. There was even a moment when ambassadors were discussing one proposal in one room, and in the same building, in another room, deputy ambassadors were discussing another proposal, both to do exactly the same thing. It's all a bit weird. If you want a reason why this is happening, it's very simple. The answer is Donald Trump, and Commission President von der Leyen basically admitted as much. She said, "I'm proposing a new sanctions package." After a phone conversation with Donald Trump, he is putting a lot of pressure on Europe to be tougher and tougher on Russian fuel.
But what are the objectives of the US here?
Well, the US definitely sees itself as an alternative supplier. I mean, one reason is that they're hawkish themselves on Putin, although their position is clearly, not always easy to read. But the other is that they see themselves as the alternative supplier to the EU. They have lots of liquefied natural gas that they produce that they think they can sell to the bloc. Trump is a big supporter of fossil fuels and a kind of climate skeptic. And they also see this huge trade deficit with the EU. And they think increasing sales of gas is one way that they can help correct what they see as this big kind of imbalance in international trade.
Okay, but still, those legislation have a lot in common. Like it's kind of the same factor. But maybe maybe Karen, can you just explain to us, in very quick terms, very short terms, what is the difference between the sanctions, which require unanimity of the members of EU countries, and REPowerEU, besides the different legal bases?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. The Commission has also been struggling to explain this for the last couple of weeks to reporters. But by their nature, sanctions are temporary. They're trying to extract a change in behaviour. And they're done on a foreign policy legal basis, which Jack mentioned, and as you said, unanimity. REPowerEU, as we said, is on a trade policy basis. It's also permanent. It's like a second rubber stamp on this decision to stop importing Russian gas. It's permanent.
Okay, so it's just to make sure that Russian gas is here for good. And
it's taken because the EU has decided Russia is no longer a reliable supplier.
And Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen has been pretty clear about this, that the idea is that sanctions are, as you say, a coercive measure. You use them to persuade people to the negotiating table. The regulation from June, as Jorgensen himself said, is going to remain in place even if there's a peace deal. This is a permanent solution because Europe thinks it can just no longer trust Russia. Whatever happens in the Ukraine war, it no longer sees it as a reliable partner.
Okay, so I think this is a key point. It's just what's happening on the front of Ukraine or what's happening with any peace deal, the sanctions are going to be lifted if there is a peace deal in any shape or form. Maybe it's a probability. But REPowerEU makes it no way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's certainly their line of argument. I think more realistically, if there are sanctions banning Russian gas, that does take the wind out of the sails a little bit of the regulation. So you have to ask, will negotiators still bother kind of enacting this measure when ultimately, possibly the sanctions might be doing all the work anyway? We'll have to wait and see because we don't really know what will happen to those. But we might find ourselves in a situation where we have the EU picking both the belt and the braces.
Okay.
COREPER ambassadors as well in their talks last week.
What is COREPER for viewers who are not in Brussels, Karen?
Okay. It's this mystical, magical chamber where all 27 ambassadors from the EU member states meet to agree on legislation. Okay. And the idea is to prepare a council. Okay. But those talks really got bogged down into how the sanctions align with the REPowerEU. Because a lot of we reported on this, the short-term contracts of LNG imports, they're banned 6 months after they enter into force.
Okay, excellent. I'm just taking a look at the chat now. Yes, so maybe a question for both of you, still for Iman, is just do we have do we have some kind of a figures or some kind of a impact assessment of which are the countries the most impacted by the Russian ban, especially from LNG importers? So you mentioned France, you mentioned also Belgium, but do we have also other countries?
France and Belgium are two big ones. Also, we see Spain as quite a big importer of LNG. The slight subtlety with these figures is often we know the first point of entry into the EU, but that doesn't necessarily correspond to the country that's using the gas. So a lot of the gas that enters at Zeebrugge, we know, then goes to the Netherlands and Germany and is used to heat German homes or in German industry, for example.
It's not specifically LNG, but and it's actually quite difficult to get public figures on this. So Eamon's asking some good questions there. But Robert Fico, the Slovak Prime Minister, when he's last time intervening with the Commission to show his opposition, in his video speech, he claimed that legal costs could reach 20 billion.
But why is it difficult just, for the EU to get like some kind of precise figures? Because like over the last 3 years, like there have been a lot of discussion on sanctions, like there have been a lot of packages of legislation actually to increase the gas market, like the integration of the gas market. So how come we still have some kind of huge holes 3 years and a half after the conflict?
That's another really good question. These are all really sensitive contract matters.
Okay.
They're kept private between suppliers and energy companies. And if one thing I've learned from reporting on this story, member states do not like to discuss their energy mix.
And, it's also the case that once gas enters the EU, it becomes, unless there's specific paperwork saying you have to say where it's come from, it becomes part of the internal market, and it's not always clear where the origin was.
Okay, I'm still going to take another question of our audience. Is still on the question of the sanctions. Is maybe like is a way like how sanctions are also a way just to prevent any rerouting. So, for example, as we saw, like some kind of Russian companies of the Russian state trying to find like diverted ways for fossil fuels to arrive in Europe. Like, are the sanctions also like able just a way to prevent this rerouting?
Indeed. I mean, it depends slightly on the how the gas arrives. But one of the kind of exemptions they've included in some of the drafts of this legislation we've seen is that there'd be easier rules for importing gas from countries that themselves sanction Russia. So if you're importing from a country that either has no access to Russian gas or has legally sanctioned or forbidden the import of Russian gas, then it will be a lot easier to import that into the EU, and you don't have to do extra checks. But the proposal is that otherwise, that you'd have to accompany kind of imports with a declaration of where this material has come from originally. Will that work? I mean, we've seen with a lot of other goods that there have proved, long ways of circumventing the sanctions. We've seen it via third countries, via China, via countries in Central Asia, that trade has mysteriously jumped from otherwise small nations. Precisely for this reason.
Excellent. We still have other questions, like many on nuclear, but I'm going to keep them for the third part. Just in case you want to bounce back of what I've been said, like we published like 2 interviews, I think, which were flagging. The first one, which I think was done by you, Kieran, of David O'Sullivan, who is a long-standing like EU diplomat and right now like is the EU sanction envoy, and another one who was an interview of Attila Steiner, who was done by our colleague Anna, on why like it was impossible according to Hungarian authorities just to actually to import more like US fossil fuels. So maybe for the last part of the chat, I'm not going to ask you to become fortune tellers, but I still need for you to make the effort to take a look at a virtual crystal ball on what's going to happen next. So maybe I'm going to start with you, Kieran. So we had like the Parliament is ready to negotiate for the REPowerEU with the Council. What's happening with ministers and ambassadors?
Yep. So there was on the council side, this ban cleared a big hurdle last week when those ambassadors I mentioned in Coreper backed the general approach. And now in Luxembourg, energy ministers are going to adopt it. So that's for the council to take its negotiating position. I'm still waiting on a date for the trialogues to start. Readers of Contexte will be the first to know when it does. But that's going to be when the Council and the Parliament negotiate with each other to reach a final position on this ban.
And I have to say, like, normally these trilogues where the Council has its position, the Parliament has its position, and they negotiate to find a common ground. These can sometimes take months, but this time the ban is supposed to start in January, which is only a few weeks away, really. So they do need to get a move on in agreeing a single unified position.
Okay, but maybe do we have already did the Danish presidency actually is pushing ministers to have a deal before the end of the presidency in December, or do we know already that the Cypriot presidency will also need to take over this file?
No, the Danish are pushing to get this done before the end of the year.
Okay, so we can have a Christmas gift for the first trilogues.
Definitely, it would be a crowning achievement for the Danish presidency as well. Okay. It's a real priority for them.
And what about the sanctions? Because, as you said last week, literally, EU ambassadors and the deputies were negotiating in different rooms in the council on the same file, the same outcome. Do we have any take on how long it's going to fly?
Yeah, I mean, sanctions, it's never very clear how they process. They have to agree everything unanimously at 27. And we don't even know what the proposals are. I mean, we've got a pretty clear idea what they say because we've been told things by various diplomats, but they haven't actually published what the proposal is because they generally don't do that until the last minute. So it's more complicated to look into our crystal ball there. And it's also a more complicated proposal. So it's not just about gas. It's also, there's provisions in there about restraining the movement of Russian diplomats within the EU and some issues that have been raised about the status of European banks in Russia, which is a particular problem for Austria. So there are other issues in there that are complicating. And remember, any single one member state can put their hand up and say, I'm not happy with this package, and then the whole thing is held up. So, maybe there'll be a school of thought that says, well, if we're banning Russian gas anyway, we might as well do it by sanctions. So there might be a kind of impetus between these two different processes. But it's pretty hard to read where the sanctions were going. I don't know if you've got kind of more thoughts on that, Kieran.
There's also, to add to what Jack was saying, there's the REPowerEU angle. Slovakia is against this trade policy plan, and it's trying to leverage influence where it's able to. And it's done this before on the sanctions, the 18th package, and it's doing it again now on the 19th package. And Fico is really pushing hard before the summit next week to extract concessions.
Okay. Okay, so just maybe another way just for either for companies or for EU countries to delay whatever legislation the EU is proposing is also going to the ECJ or taking legal action. So you already mentioned that very likely Gazprom's lawyers are already beefing up any briefs they can send to anyone about just to phase out of this ban. But do we have maybe other hints we can explore, maybe other kind of legal ways we can watch out in the coming weeks in case REPowerEU or the sanctions are being approved?
There's a definitely I think that is going to be the it seems fairly clear that they will find some kind of compromise on the legislation. That's me kind of making my prediction. I'm putting my money on the table. I think there will be a regulation. I also think there will be legal challenges either to the regulation itself or to the contracts that are then terminated as a result. So that could take the form of someone going to the ECJ, a country that's not happy with the provisions. And I can think of a couple of examples of countries who, like Hungary, who are particularly kind of grumpy about this. But it could also take place in the individual commercial courts. There's individual contracts being squabbled over whether a European importer has the right to cancel the contract. Are they still obliged to pay their Russian supplier for a breach of contract, and so on? And those will take place in different kinds of commercial court that we don't necessarily. It's not so straightforward to map out. But when there's billions of euros at stake, there's probably going to be litigation.
Okay, good. Karen, do you have any take on any legal action?
There's the Commission argument that to use the force majeure, and we did quite a long article about the political impetus of this ban meeting legal reality. There's been this trend of turning away from Russian energy. Can you really argue this is unforeseen? We probably will report on any cases coming up. So,
Okay, so maybe we can, instead of gas, shifting a bit on another energy, which is nuclear. So the Commission has also promised a legal proposal on nuclear fuel, but so far it has been a bit of dragging its feet. So why is it so difficult, and why the Commission is kind of promising without any delivering here? Who wants to take this question? You, Jack, or you, Karen?
Indeed, Russia is also quite a big supplier of nuclear materials, so kind of uranium and the products around it. Obviously has quite a lot of expertise in that field. And this was always supposed to be part of the Commission's original plan. It was sort of announced in the roadmap that they originally set out in May. Then it was going to come a little shortly after the gas proposals, and then it was going to come in the autumn. And now we're now in October, and it's still not here. It's quite hard to get a definitive answer why. One answer is it's made under a different treaty base. It's a completely different legal. There's a completely different treaty about atomic issues.
Okay, so it's Euratom. So we are
indeed.
Okay,
and that means, as with sanctions, you have this requirement for member state unanimity. It's a lot more complicated to find things that people can sign up to. It might be technically more complicated. There's obviously a lot more issues and a lot more dependencies that it's harder to map out. And it may be a little bit of classic Brussels politics, that if you have two things on the table at the same time, you can use one as a bargaining chip against the other. And if member states have the right of veto over the nuclear proposal, they might use that as a way of exerting leverage on the other proposal they don't like, the gas ban. So it might be a classic bit of Brussels horse trading, that they're simply waiting for this other regulation to be out of the way and signed and put in the official journal, and then they can get going on the other much more complicated issue.
Okay, so this already kind of answers a bit the question we have for Nathan or Nathan. I'm sorry about the pronunciation, I don't know. So it's really about how the phasing out of the Russian gas can be a top template or model for nuclear fossil fuels. So what you are basically explaining, say right now, as it is nuclear, it is Euratom, so it has dedicated kind of rules and settings and legal arguments which can be a bit different. But still, do we have any, maybe for you, Kieran, do we still have some kind of a timetable? Is it, for example, we published last week the Commission work program for next year? Is it on it?
I had a good look. It wasn't.
Okay.
Unfortunately for us, we do know from our reporting that this ban is ready. They're just like Jack described, keeping it in reserve. I guess you can't veto it if it's not put forward yet. So we'll have to wait and see what the Commission puts out.
Okay. Is also the Commission waiting what's going to happen also? Because nuclear is a controversial issue. I don't have to tell to energy reporters and geeks in Brussels that it can be for a long time there have been a debate between German gas and French nuclear. Does it also play a role in this debate, or do you think the Commission is a bit cautious to say, okay, with very strong anti-nuclear countries, I don't know, Austria or Luxembourg, how they're going to interact with this proposal? Are they kind of waiting on it?
It came up in the early discussions. This was before the Commission separated the two.
Yeah.
And they were talking in the early talks between member states about the legal basis. A few of the pro-nuclear member states were explicit that they do not like the force majeure argument for... they don't like the legal uncertainty surrounding banning Russian nuclear fuels.
Indeed, and we might start to see a different member state dynamic for exactly that reason, that the countries that are nuclear countries and the countries that are gas countries aren't always the same. Equally, there's some EU member states that are just skeptical about the whole Russian fuel phase out altogether. The likes of Hungary and Slovakia, a little bit less pro-Ukrainian than some of their other counterparts. And just for political reasons, we might see them taking the same stance. But as Kieran says, there isn't a proposal on the table yet, so it's a bit hard to sort of start mapping out who thinks what about it.
Well, I think it's still kind of interesting to say, Kieran, you said, a proposal is ready, So like it means like it has been fine printed, it has been vetted by the Commission's lawyers, the Commission legal service. So I think it's still very interesting to see like how they are kind of waiting to see what is going to happen, which is actually part. If I'm taking a look at the chat. Okay, sorry, like my computer is a bit slow. So if I am looking of what Roger is asking, is like it's about like what Commissioner Jorgensen, what he said in May about like new restrictions to phase out. It's still a question about the nuclear fuel. So just okay, I know right now it's kind of a template of how the gas could be a template for nuclear, but like maybe for you, Karen, as you wrote the story of the Russian gas, how it's going to be implemented by like when it was released in June, like can you maybe go to a bit more into the weeds on how basically like we this ban could work for nuclear? Like it's very maybe still speculative, but in terms of what you would think.
This is mostly speculative at this stage. And I think the questions show actually what the energy lobby in Brussels is waiting to see. Like the Commission has kept this in reserve because it's a politically sensitive matter. The gas ban was their priority. It's a much bigger share of Russian revenue because the state budget is so structurally dependent. Ironically, the state budget of Russia is structurally dependent on these exports. So that was Commission priority.
But I mean, you're exactly right that this is a really, it's part of the same program and a political one. But in energy policy terms, it's clearly very different. The EU is trying to phase out fossil fuels as it heads towards net zero. In any case, the same is not true of nuclear, which von der Leyen has said needs to be part of the EU's power base. It is, and it raises different legal issues, and just the technical details of how you will do it in practice, I think, are very different. So the political wind behind it, the political motivation is the same, but you might end up with a kind of different outcome.
Okay, thank you for this. I'm taking a look right now, still at the chat. On this one, I think we are getting there in terms of the questions. So maybe in terms of the follow-up stories that we could mention, like we have done already a few articles. I can already I think they should pop up in the chat or by email very soon. One by Karen and Anna on basically like the legal challenges around the ban and how they are facing the regulation. Maybe on a slightly different topic, like our colleague Damien really worked in the previous week on the EU-US energy deal and how its impact for the broader transatlantic picture. And the last one really by Kira Taylor on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and how they have been so important for the war and potentially for any peace deal. So feel free, to take a look at our website. So I think our time is up. It might be time to close down our first ever live for Contexte EU in English. It was on Russian fuel. So thank you very much, Kieran, and thank you very much, Jack, for your insight, for Samuel and Yanis for handling your questions, for Nicolas Kefelec and Frédéric Dubosc who designed this beautiful decor. Most of all, thank you very much, readers, or viewers, for watching and contributing. We would like to know what are your thoughts of our program, so please, to take a few minutes to answer the satisfaction surveys that will be dropping in your inbox very shortly. And if this had piqued your interest, please take a moment to take a look at Contexte.com, our beautiful website, when you will find, everything about the Russian gas, but also a lot of other scoops on EU energy and policy energy topics, but more broadly, the Brussels political scene. So thank you for joining us and see you very soon on Contexte Live.